Contention 98. Our first contention is about hurting Spain's economy. This happens in two ways, and the first is through revenue. Cudesova of CNN Money explains that a fifth of Spanish tax revenue is supported by Catalonia, one of the richest regions in Spain. And much like any progressive tax system, Catalonia's share is crucial to ensuring the stability of the poor and working class via direct government assistance and social programs. Second is investment. Al Jazeera in 2017 writes that Catalonia is home to the largest Asian businesses of Spain, with 25% of all goods and services produced in Catalonia. Because of this, Catalonia is the largest regional drawer of foreign direct investment to the country. Overall, Rodriguez Pose of LSE concludes that a farming would cost Spain 20% of its GDP overnight, and this loss of value will collapse exports and consumer confidence, with the poor feeling the lion's share of the impact. Our second contention is about freezing over. A farming would lead to the international isolation of Catalonia. As Ashish Kumar, the Atlantic Council in 2017 explains, an independent Catalonia would by definition no longer be part of the EU, and would see barriers go up between it and EU member states overnight. The implication of this would be no free movement for people with Catalan passports, no free movement of goods and services to and from Catalonia, and a potential loss of access to the euro. Alfonso Valero of the Conservation furthers that because joining the EU requires a unanimous yes vote, it is all but certain that even if Catalonia attempted to rejoin, it would face certain rejection. And this is because Sarah Williams of Vox writes, an independent Catalonia would set the dangerous precedent for secessionist movements everywhere to challenge EU states. So rejecting Catalonia would be necessary to uphold the structural integrity of the EU and show consequences for future challenges to power. However, even if Catalonia were to bypass these hurdles, the BBC reports that historically, the process of EU integration would take a minimum of 10 years. And within this decade, Catalonia will be left in a state of complete uncertainty, laying the undeniable foundation for a failed economy. Sophia Bosch of CNBC explains that in the event of independence, Catalonia's separation from the EU would guarantee a loss of 2/3 of all exports and 70% of foreign direct investments, leading analysts to project that unemployment would double on impact. Importantly, the loss of access to the European Central Bank and Spanish debt relief would indefinitely delay Catalonia's ability to recover, as it could not invest in the creation of important state apparatuses like a federal banking system and improved infrastructure. As such, the immediate consequence of affirming is a scathing recession felt most directly by those at the bottom. Post concludes that independence translates into, quote, a period of rapid impoverishment from which Catalonia may never recover. Our third and final contention is about international fracture. Press News in 2017 explains that the Catalan independence movement risks a spillover effect onto neighboring countries, as the precedent it sets could be the first step in completely fracturing an already weak EU. Spain officially granting Catalonia independence would break many clearly drawn lines in its constitution with severe implications. Rachel Donadio of The Atlantic reports that following Catalonian independence, secessionist movements in Italy, Belgium, and France may rapidly move to secede, claiming Spain's example as precedent. Already, Al Jazeera reports in 2017 that Catalonia's fight for independence has intensified conflict in other Spanish regions. The best example is with the current Basque movement. Holly Elliott of CNBC in 2017 writes that the Basque country also claims its status as an autonomous community like Catalonia. The situation is uniquely unstable because of the region's history of violent separatism and terrorist attacks carried out by a nationalist group, and the top spokesman has recently made moves to indicate a resurgence of independence movements based on Catalonia. The impact is snowballing instability. Sternzik of Vox EU writes in a comprehensive analysis that any secessionist movement of a small state from a large one, inspired out of conflict, is likely to collapse the smaller state's economy. And even in the absence of full secession, Bloomberg writes that political turmoil and conflict across multiple areas of Spain and beyond can spell the downfall of the euro and accompanying markets. Thus speaking.
Can I see one card? Actually, two. Can I see Bosch, loss of 2/3 of exports and 70% of FDI, and then Vox at the end that says secession leads like the downfall, all that stuff. Not Bloomberg.
Yeah.
No, the one before.
Yeah, the Vox guy.
Yeah, Vox.
Vox EU card.
Yeah. There's Vox EU. Can you pull the other one? 2/3 exports.
Yeah, sure. Well, can I just get that one too, like after the first construction?
Yeah, for sure. I just need it before my rebuttal.
Should be concluding remarks.
Okay, thanks.
10 seconds.
Yeah.
Alright, I'm gonna get the other one after your face.
Yeah.
you want your phone back?
Oh yeah, that's nice.
Microphone ready? Judge? And Ryan?
Yep.
Court affirms resolve Spain should grant Catalonia its independence. Our first contention is alleviating the refugee crisis. The Public Diplomatic Council quantifies in 2016 that 80% of Catalans are in favor of taking in more refugees. Thus, the AL Monitor writes in 2016 that Catalonia has already prepared infrastructure to accommodate these refugees. Specifically, Meredith Hoffman advised continues in October 2016 that Catalonia has funded housing and social programs for refugees, but the problem is that the only entity that can authorize the intake of refugees is the Spanish government. Unfortunately, Emma Anderson and the local province in 2016 that a lack of political will in Madrid prevents Catalonia from putting its resources to good use. That's why Joseph Wilson of the Independent Province in February 2017 that Spain accepted just 6% of its pledged 17,000 refugees. Fortunately, independence gives a new hope. The Tasman News Agency writes in 2017 that with independence, Catalonia would take in refugees without Spanish intervention. Specifically, Hoffman quantifies that Barcelona alone is prepared to take in over 9,000 refugees in just 2 years. The impact is saving lives. Meryl Smith, the USCR, writes in 2015 that the alternative to resettlement is refugee camps. Problematically, these camps are desolate and dangerous, which is why Malmstrom, the European Commission, concluded in 2012 that resettlement is the difference between life and death for these refugees. Our second contention is averting the violence. Richard Gonzalez, a foreign policy writer in 2017, that absent independence, the most likely scenario is an entrenched conflict with no end in sight, allowing this to continue inflames tensions and creates a drastic instability for 4 reasons. First is democratic suppression. Jeremy Nation of ETH News explains in December 2017 that the consistent invalidation of Catalan elections by Spain has created a pervasive sense among Catalonians that representative governance has gone out the window. Unfortunately, Nafis Hamid of the Atlantic Bar writes in 2017 that this lack of faith in the democratic approach fuels the independence movement and pushes Catalonians towards violent approaches when they perceive that democratic representation has failed. Second is a radical hijacking. Tobias Fund of the Financial Times writes in 2017 that the drive for independence has shifted increasingly to radical nationalist movements. Unfortunately, Patrick Kingsley of the New York Times explains in 2017 that this Catalan nationalism has provoked counter-nationalism in Spain. Thus, Bonnie Field of the London School of Economics concludes in 2017 that the respective Spanish and Catalan positions are irreconcilable. As a result, Jamie Demer of VOA News concludes in October 2017 that radical Catalans or national Spaniards could plunge the region into conflict at any moment. Third is Spanish aggression. Giles Trema of The Guardian explains in 2017 that with EU support, the Spanish government has adopted a hardline stance in response to the Catalan crisis. Problematically, Jeruf Garland Brown, Political Review, writes in 2017 that this hardline response serves only to further tensions and make it more probable that the region explodes into conflict. Indeed, Sarah Plan of UT Austin finalizes in 2017 that Catalan independence would threaten the legitimacy of the Spanish government, which is why Madrid would be willing to go to war to stop secession. Fourth is the Catalan strategy. Giles Trema of The Guardian explains in 2017 that separatists have had a unique incentive to provoke violence because Spanish crackdowns create the perception that they are innocent Catalans unjustly attacked by a repressive Spanish government. Empirically, the independence movement has had little momentum until Catalans catalyzed the visceral police violence during the October referendum. This pro-independence Catalans had already planned civil disobedience, prompting confrontation that could easily escalate. The impact of instability is civil conflict. Sarah Plin of UT Austin explains in 2017 that the convergence of these factors, the most common indicators of civil conflict, into the instability of Catalonia makes a devastating civil war incredibly likely. Problematically, Rice Smith of the Express impacts in October 2017 that the Catalan crisis is incredibly reminiscent of the past Spanish Civil War that killed 500,000 people. Fortunately, there is a way out, as Guy Hedgecoe of the Irish Times explained in 2017 that granting Catalonia independence would entail an amicable agreement with Spain. Jason Soares of Al Jazeera corroborates in December 2017 that granting a legal path to secession limits violence, and that's what Gustav Cheer of the Journal for Peace concludes in 25 that amicable partitions reduce the probability of violent conflict by 59%. So to stop the madness, we affirm. Thank you.
So on June 17, 2017, what did Spain promise to do to incoming refugees?
What did they do?
Accept 17,000 refugees from Syria and Iraq. And
No,
how
no,
many
no,
did
no,
they
no,
shut
no,
off in
no.
the previous year?
No, they had pledged to take in 17,000. They only accepted 6%
So
of that.
they pledged to
accepted
take in
1,000.
16,000 previous year. And then they couldn't accept the rest of the 16,000 because they
Okay.
accepted their maximum capacity and were stretched out of resources.
No.
Then in
No.
February, 160,000 people marched into streets protesting them to take refugees. And in July, the protest continues, and Spain said they would accept the rest.
Okay, you're spinning a false narrative. What actually
That's
happened
what
was
happened.
so the EU said they put a quota for the European Union, right?
Yeah.
Or for Spain, they said
Yeah.
they're going to take in 17,000
Yeah.
refugees. They only accepted 6% of these refugees.
It was
right?
16,000 in 2016, and they actually expanded that quota in 2017.
Okay, 17,000, right. They only accepted 6% of this. The
Yeah.
only thing that's stopping, so Barcelona, right,
Yeah.
they're one to go and take in the brunt of these refugees.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to because Spain does not want them to. They've taken a hardline response to these refugees, and they've declared they will not be
You just
taking
repeated
anymore.
your case. You didn't respond to anything I said, which is the fact that the reason they only accepted a small amount at that time is because they were stretched on resources because of the most recent economic recession. But we're telling you that as the time grows and the political tide is turning in Spain, that leads to more and more acceptance of refugees, like the expansion of the quota to 17,000 in July.
Okay.
Can I take another question?
No, I'm going to take one. Okay, so in your second contention, you talk about the isolation and they can't join the EU.
Yeah.
So you talk about this issue of like Balkanization, where they're going to go and they're going to split.
That's
up
more of my
into
contention
countries.
3 than my contention.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. So like, how is that different than your contention 3 when you're talking about this fracturing?
I mean, it's different. Like, there's a reason they're contention 2. And
No, I
contention
understand that. Okay. So the question is, you're talking about they can't join the EU. What is like the EU's reason to reject them? If the EU,
Sure.
they trade
Yeah.
with them, they work with Catalonia,
Yeah.
they have vested interests. Why do they not want them to
Sure.
join?
So countries like France, Belgium, and Italy, when they see Catalonia
Sure.
succeed, let's say that they accept them in, or maybe they don't accept them in, let's say they trade with them,
Okay.
and Catalonia is successful. All that does is it sets a precedent for movements inside their own countries that, yo, I can succeed and I'll be good long term because I can trade with people. Right?
That's
And
also
those
your-
countries don't want to set that precedent. And joining the EU requires a unanimous yes vote, which is why countries like Spain, France, and Belgium have, Spain,
Gotcha,
France,
gotcha.
Belgium, and Italy have went out and publicly said they wouldn't.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's also your third contention, but go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, it's like a warning my third
Gotcha.
contention, that's true. Yeah, so under contention 2 about like radical hijacking
Yeah.
and counter-nationalism in Spain.
Sure.
So how many of these counter-nationalists have seats in the Spanish government right now?
So basically, like Rajoy, right? This is a pretty
Yeah.
nationalist government. They're in control of Spain, so they're the ones that are saying we don't want Catalonia to secede. They're the nationalists. What happens is when
Mhm.
Catalonian nationalists, they get like more inflamed. They're working harder. Then other Spanish fringe groups, they're the ones that are going to be acting out.
So
For
how did
example,
they retaliate after the election on the
Well,
21st?
for example, like there was a bunch of like Spanish nationalists went and attacked the Catalan like radio station.
After the 21st? I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
Did you give them the 65?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Wait, we actually called it said after the election. This is from October.
Oh,
They just
yeah, no,
know
yeah.
when from the election.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, sure. Okay.
We'll run through it. Are you guys ready?
Yeah. Wait, actually, let me get a drink of water first.
And the judge? Okay. Just done. Time starts. Let's get into the first contention, which talks about refugee resettlement. So there are a couple of problems with this, but the first of them is that they're spinning a false narrative. They say that Spain is just like categorically opposed to taking in refugees. But according to the Daily, in the year 2016, Spain actually accepted its entire quota of 16,000 refugees. And the government came out saying that the only reason they would be strapped to take in refugees in 2017 is because they had overgone on their limit and they were strapped for resources. In fact, Barcelona, the region which they say can support more refugees, was taking the lion's share of the refugees refugees anyways because the other regions did not have the resources to support them. And Al Jazeera finds that because they took less refugees in 2017, there have been protests and a massive shift in political will to continue to take refugees moving forward. The government is not hardline against them. They're going to continue to meet these targets. It was literally just an off year. Don't let them spin it that way. But then second, I would argue that an independent Catalonia can take refugees anyways. All of their evidence saying that Barcelona has the infrastructure necessary to support refugees is talking about a Barcelona that is part of Spain. If Catalonia were to secede, there would be pieces of infrastructure that they rely on the Spanish federal government for that they lose access to. For example, all of the water and electricity in Catalonia is centralized in Madrid, so they would have to renegotiate those deals and recreate that infrastructure, while simultaneously they lack access to basic infrastructure like a central bank and borders, and therefore they would be focusing on that instead of spending their time helping refugees. The country's priorities would change in a world where they are independent. But then, the big turn here is that when you vote for them, you're going to drastically decrease funding for the EURF, or European Union Refugee Fund, a fund that funds into all EU resettlement programs, not only for Spain, but for the EU as a whole. And there are three reasons why. The first is a rightward push. The vast majority of the left-leaning seats that vote to bring in refugees in Spanish parliaments come from Catalonia, because Catalonia is one of the most liberal regions in the country. So if you remove those seats from the occasion, because Catalonia is independent, there's going to be a rightward shift in their parliament, but it's going to decrease support for all pro-refugee policies, including the billions of dollars of funding that Spain provides every single year. The second is economics. If Spain's economy moves into a recession with a 20% loss of its GDP, it's going to be less able to fund this. But the third is a rightward push in all of the EU, because when you increase this balkanization and the push for secession everywhere, all these countries experience right-wing crackdowns, which then decreases the power of the groups that are pushing for EURF funding. A decrease in funding for all resettlement outweighs in two ways. The first is that it decreases funding for efforts that help everybody in all of the EU, not just Spain. But the second is that they draw a binary. They say that refugee camps are pretty bad and that some people died there, but resettlement is better. The difference between a refugee camp and resettlement is an important difference, but the difference between some camp and no support altogether is a lot worse. It's much more of a life and death issue there, so we're ultimately going to have to turn. Finally, we link in because if we prove that Catalonia goes into a recession when it leaves the EU, then it certainly will not take in more refugees. When countries experience recessions, they focus on their own priorities. For example, all of the countries around Syria, like Jordan and Lebanon, stop taking in refugees because of a recession. Now, go to contention 2. They're arguing that the conflict is going to continue and that this is going to lead to a war. But this is literally atrocious because the two sides that would go into a war have said they would never be violent. For example, the New York Times finds that Puigdemont, the leader of the independence movement, has explicitly called on his party to not take up arms, and not a single shot has been fired by them, while the Foreign Policy magazine finds that Spain would not resort to any kind of civil conflict because after their one altercation of violence on October 1st, they received international condemnation. They say Spain wants to protect their legitimacy. A country with 10 points higher democracy score than the US is not going to take up arms against its people and be viewed as illegitimate in the international community. Then, on their 4 links, the first one they talk about is democratic suppression, but this has changed. Catalan News finds that all of the police that were suppressing the vote have already left Catalonia. Second, they see there's radical hijacking. But according to The Hill, after the recent election, 2/3 of the Catalan separatist parties actually support compromise as opposed to full-on independence. Third, they talk about a hardline stance, but again, crossed up by the foreign policy response here. And fourth, they talk about clashes, and you can cross up by the New York Times card here, again, about the separatists. But the big argument here is compromise. The Guardian finds that 21% of Catalan people want independence, 74% of them want compromise, and they further that a commission has already been created to resolve the tax issues that caused the Catalan independence movement in the first place, which is why the situation can peacefully de-escalate. And the ING group concludes that there is an 85% chance that the conflict is resolved through compromise without any kind of violence or conflict. Thus, vote nay.
Can I see your foreign policy evidence?
Yeah. Catalonia. Won't go to civil war. Hold up.
pause 10 seconds. We'll take some prep before rebuttal beginning now. Okay, that was 15 seconds.
So 35 to use.
I'm just gonna drink water. Wait, so order is their case, my case. I'm reading an overview at the top of theirs, and I'm probably going to go pretty fast. Time starts now. Start with an overview for the case. Richard Gonzalez of the Foreign Policy magazine explains in 2017 that the Catalan conflict is no end in sight, with secessionists refusing to budge and support for independence inevitably rising to a generational change in the warrants in our case. Ultimately, Kevin Murmel of the University of Colorado furthers in 2016 that the Catalan independence movement is very strong and unlikely to dissipate. Thus, Brian Cunningham of Pennsylvania State University finalizes in October 2017 that if Spain doesn't grant Catalonia independence, it only leaves Catalonia to take independence by force. Thus, it's better to rip off the band-aid now, because any negative impact of Catalan secession or their entire case is going to happen eventually. However, if we grant Catalonia independence now, there's two impacts. First, it prevents the inevitable violence that is inherent to an independence process. Jaroslav Tier, that we read in our case, tells you that amicable partitions reduce the probability of violent conflict by 59%. But second, it gives time to heal. Ria Mayadi of the Barcelona Center for International Affairs concludes in a statistical model of Catalonia's economy after independence that Catalonia's economy would perform better in the long term after the transition period is over. Indeed, John Yeomans of the Telegraph copies in 2017 that they split now, Catalonia would be better off economically by 2030. At that point, their entire case is non-unique. You're going to be voting for us. But then let's go to the first contention about the economy of Spain. Their first warrant is revenue. You're turning it against them because Hedgeco explains that traditionally Spain has austerity policies that are going to hurt the poor a lot. That's why, however, Oriol Martinez explains that when you take away the cash cow of Catalonia, Spain is forced to reform socially and give their poor more money. At that point, you're seeing that the only way to change the fundamental economic structure is to vote AF. But then, second, turn it again, because the ACN explains that Catalonia is cuffed from helping the poor right now because they don't have the means to do so because of the autonomous state that they have. But then go to their second warning about the investment. The issue is you're turning it against them, because Nagel explains that the current crisis is what drives away FDI. That's why Nagel explains that ending the crisis by giving independence is going to be preferable in the long term. Let's go to the second contention about freezing over. At the top, Al Jazeera explains that in the long term there's going to be a 7% GDP growth for Catalonia. That turns this argument, but then their only link is the EU. There's four problems here. First, Griffiths explains that not letting them join the EU means that Spanish insolvency and the loss of power of the euro is going to result in Spain is going to prefer letting them into the EU at any point, and same with the other countries. But then Hedco explains that the resolution implies an amicable agreement. At that point, Spain is going to negotiate such that they can join. But third, this is the most important response. The Federalist explains that the Vienna Convention of 1978 means that secession, when successor states are still within the treaties, the economic treaties that they were in before with the host state. That means that Catalonia is still going to be part of the EU. But then fourth, Nagel explains that Catalonia can join the ECB. This argument is not unique. Then they talk about infrastructure development. The issue is Estenol explains that the reason that they don't have good infrastructure right now is because they're paying over taxes to the central government. When you affirm that's going to change, they pay less taxes, they have more money for infrastructure. Let's go to the third contention about international fracturing. Three responses at the top. First, Forsberg explains that this isn't going to happen for two reasons. First, just because the Spanish government gives into concessions and let Catalonia secede doesn't mean that other governments are going to do the same. At that point, this doesn't embolden other movements. But secondly, more importantly, Forsberg explains that it's not going to increase the desire for other independence movements to become independent. At that point, they're not winning the internal link. But then the second response comes from Varoufakis, who tells that Catalonia has an incentive to reform right now because the EU has an incentive to reform if you give independence, because small states can then peacefully secede. But then you're turning the argument against them because they talk about the Basque Country. Plana explains that empirically these other groups are more violent when they turn their backs on the central government because the central government doesn't accommodate Catalonia. Then they read you the impact on instability. Their link card literally says that an amicable agreement would solve okay, let's go back to my case. Go to my second contention about averting the violence. They read you a response to the top that says Puigdemont doesn't want war. That's not our warrants. All of our warrants are about the radical factions in Catalonia that are going to prompt the conflict. But then they say this foreign policy analysis that says that they don't want civil war. The issue is I called for the card. The card literally says that that's how traditionally the Spanish government looked at it. However, they put boots on the ground, and as a result, what that means is that yes, in the past maybe Spain didn't want a civil war, but the convergence of the factors is what gives us our third warrant about the Spanish aggression. That's why you extend Plano of UT Austin, who explains that Madrid will go to wars to stop secession. At that point, you're giving us the impact because then we would contend that the radicals in Catalonia also are going to fight for the rights. That's Cunningham in our overview right there giving us the link. But then go to the impact level. They say that they want a compromise and they read you this 85% card. First, compromise isn't happening right now. That is why they want independence. But secondly, more importantly, just because they would like compromise doesn't mean compromise does anything. Empirically, in 2006 they compromised, but in 2010 the Spanish government struck it down. At that point, compromise doesn't solve. Independence is only going to rise. That's the internal link to our case.
Really quickly, can you just highlight the sentence in our card that since you just the argument?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One sec.
So I can see it before class. In the graph. You said it was afterwards, as traditionally. Okay.
It says Valley traditional.
Yeah.
Valley.
Wait. I don't understand that.
Wait, sorry. Can you just explain?
So it says like while they're not shy right now, they traditionally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Let me just get a drink of water.
Are you ready?
Yeah, you're not supposed to.
Okay, let's start. What radical factions are in Catalonia?
Like people who are
Can you
very
name
far,
them?
bro. Like
Can you name
I don't
them?
know the names. Of
Okay,
people.
there are 3 parties for independence, right?
So like
One that's
R1
radical
isn't
and
about
2 that are
parties.
pretty moderate.
Like R1 isn't about parties.
Okay, so then what are the factions called? What? How many
Like
people are
I don't
in
know.
them?
Like what the radical hijacking warrant is
Yeah.
that radicals can plunge the region into conflict by
How?
provoking wide-scale conflict.
How?
So, for example, we give you that Spaniard nationalists attacked a radio station, thereby prompting like lots of backlash.
Okay,
We
so
would
you're
contend
talking
that
about
they
like
build them.
individual attacks, not state-sanctioned
Right,
violence.
but we would contend that like over the long term, as independence grows with generational.
Okay, these are
changes
all
in
buzzwords, right? In their government, right? Because you need a government in order to wage a war.
No, you need like a militia.
Okay, yes, and militia is run by who?
Like there are lots of examples of like conflicts where the government is not.
You're
the one
making
controlling-
Catalonia sound like a
so
failed
for
state. Catalonia is one of the richest regions in
Like
Spain.
Plana
Almost everyone
explains
there
that
is
the
an upper middle
convergence
class
of the
person.
factors right now makes civil conflict really likely. Can I
Yo,
have
the
a
reason
question?
they're trying to independent is because of taxes being used progressively.
Ooh.
It's like California is
Let's
mad
just talk
because
about,
our
like-
taxes go into welfare. These are not people who are going to pick up arms and go to war.
Right, but
These are rich
we
people
tell
who are
you-
complaining about paying
Yes,
too much
that
taxes.
like may have been the original reason they wanted.
still the main
independence. It has
reason.
shifted. No,
Okay.
the radical hijacking one is very.
Has there
clear.
ever
Buck
been a
evidence
period
says-
of time in the last 50 years where independence has enjoyed more than 20% support, except for after the tax
What do
autonomy
you
bill
mean?
was struck down?
Wait, what?
Has
They have,
there
like,
ever been
They
a
have a
period-
majority in support right now. We can.
Whoa, 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 whoa. In the last 50 years, except for after their one tax bill was struck down, has there ever been more than 20% support for
Yes,
independence?
right now. Can I have a question?
Except for now, has there ever been a period of time?
Wait, what do you mean except for now?
The only time support
No,
increased
we
past
are
20%
saying that now
was when
is
a
the-
tax autonomy bill was struck down.
Yes,
that bill
we
is
would
currently
contend
being
that in the
renegotiated,
long
which is
term-
why
No, 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 no,
21%
no.
of people want independence as of the most recent polls.
Can I,
which is,
we
like,
spent
not a
2
high
minutes on
number.
this. Can I have a
Yeah,
question?
I know.
So in response to my refugees argument, we read
Yeah.
this really long term that says the left wing is going to leave the Spanish
It's one
government.
of 3
right?
reasons,
Right.
but yeah.
So right now, are they passing right wing policies or left wing policies?
They're funding the EURF's full
Right,
commitment.
but are they like this is with a right wing government, right?
The only people in their parliament who are pushing for supporting refugees are the
How
left-wing
can
seats.
how can a minority opposition pass this policy without right support?
It's called governance. When you're the majority,
Wait.
you have to make
You can say
compromises with
it's
the
called governance.
I'm answering. That was the first 3 words of my answer. When you're in the majority, you have to make compromises with the minority to get your bill passed. So one thing the minority might want is, hey, we'll pass your conservative bill on
And that-
taxes if you fund the EURF
And
fund.
governance
If you remove the
occurs
only
no matter
advocates for
how
E-
many people are
so
in
how
the
is an
parliament.
all conservative government going to fund a
It's
refugee
not
fund they don't
no.
want?
The Catalonian left is not the only left wing. Like
Catalan
Catalonia
seats comprise more than
how many
half
seats
of all
are the,
leftist
no,
seats in the
no.
federal parliament.
No. There are 47 seats from Catalonia. How many of these are in the opposition party? 42, right?
What do you mean opposition party?
So in the opposition minority. So Rajoy has his government, right?
Yeah.
The Catalan left makes up a sect of those opposing him, right?
I'm just saying that of the overall parliament, more than
Right.
half of the left seats are Catalonia.
No,
that's a
and I'm
huge
saying
blow.
that's
and
not
you're
true.
picking it one of 3 warrants, the other 2 of which are
Yeah,
also pretty
we'll address the
substantial.
other 2 later.
Yeah.
We'll use them.
It's going to be important if the left wing leaves. The issue is that the right wing is the reason why refugee policy isn't occurring right now. They're not taking in refugees. Only 6% of their 70,000 commitment is taken in, and specifically, like the war in Sarah
That's 1/3. Alright, everyone's good?
Yeah.
Mr. Ryan's second rebuttal overview.
Whoa.
Independence is not inevitable because compromise is on the table right now, as Sebastian explains. The only time where independence had an over 20% support rate was after 2006 and then 2010 when they struck down the constitutional reforms. The reason this happens because of tax autonomy. The whole point is that the compromise that exists right now is to solve the problems that existed before, which is why The Guardian, the most recent report right in today's debate, says that support right now is only 21%. In fact, 74% of Catalans wants compromise, but more specifically on our contention too. What they first say is that the long term they will have a 7% growth. This assumes that they would have trade winning the argument or refuse the response. But second, they say Spain would prefer. It doesn't matter what Spain would prefer. The warrants that other countries like France, Belgium, and Italy will be scared for their own secession movements, so they would reject it. Then he says, oh, there will still be in other treaties. A couple things. One, Canada is one of like 12 countries in the world not in the WTO. They aren't in these treaties anyways. But two, you have to reapply to be part of the EU. It's just the fiscal rules of the Parliament. That's why the EU Parliament head went out and said that every single country in the EU except one has literally said they would never bring Catalonia back inside the EU. Then he says on infrastructure that, oh, if you decrease taxes, you'll increase the amount of investment. But that's not the argument. You fundamentally misunderstand. We are saying that if you don't have a central bank or state apparatus like they used to have in Catalonia and the infrastructure such as water and electricity that Spain holds, that leads to the decreased ability to invest, which is the long-term scaling accession. You cleanly simply box the EU impact card. But more specifically on international fracturing, again, you use three flippant responses that don't respond to the argument at all. The argument is that yes, right now, other movements aren't really seeing this correlation. The point is that when you vote pro, you need to focus shift from secession movements demanding autonomy to demanding actual independence, which wouldn't exist right now. His responses don't even apply. But more specifically on their case, we're extending a couple things. First is the EU are turning themselves into three wars. The first is that Catalonia is the only liberal person pushing for economy. But second is that when Spain's economy decreases because Catalonia isn't there to trade with them, then they win it. And third, and they increase the amount of secession with our contention three, increase the amount of right-wing funding. Because of that, you decrease the amount of refugees everywhere. That's the biggest lies because you're fighting refugees in the entirety of the EU. I contention to a couple of things. The first is that call for four replies cards specifically says that Spain has been scaling those actions. He reads it wrong. But second, Spain has already withdrawn the police forces. We're supposed to be on compromise. You're saying the ING analysis says there's an 85% chance of full solvency, and this is because the point is to reverse the failures of the 2010 compromise, which he doesn't understand. Thus be your tonight about.
We'll take prep beginning now. We're at the program.
That's how it's written?
Yep.
Carter? Start the issue of the refugee crisis. What we proved is the only reason why refugees are not coming into Catalonia to right now is because the right wing is the ones that are controlling the political climate right now. They're the ones that are in the party. Rajoy and his government are rejecting refugees. Anderson tells you that the right wing is the ones that are actually rejecting them. That's why they only said to 6% of refugees. And also they should be like the EU balkanization because of refugees, which leads to like this downturn like overall the EU like refugees coming in. That simply false because we're responding to this under other war. We're telling you that there's no incentive for like these other countries to go in and balkanize. So there's still going to be an like influx of refugees. And also remember Catalonia is going to be sending more refugees because Barcelona is prepared to take in 9,000. Other 17,000 were pledged. So overall, we see a net increase of refugees in like Catalonia because they're able to get them. Now, an overview on their case. Rember Gonzalez, who tells you that there's no incentive. Mr. Merkel tells you there's a very strong movement right now where people are supporting this, and it's only become stronger because the generational changes, where the people, the younger people are growing up, and they want to see Catalonian independence. Also, Catalonia tells you that they will be taking it by force if they're not granted independence. That's what the radical factions are coming in right there, and those are the ones that are actually creating this conflict. Now, moving down to this case about balkanization. Remember, Hesper tells you that it will be an amicable agreement between Spain and Catalonia. They're granting their independence. There's no like fight right there. It's amicable. And all the Federalists tells you that the Catalonia will still be in the EU because when they're seceded from a smaller nation like that, they will still be in the EU. So don't let that get you. Now, the next moving on to this issue about the Basque Country. Remember, like the Basque Country, they're going to be more mad. That's a term right there when they see the Catalans not rejected because they want their fellow people to be able to secede. Now, on our case, this is an issue about Spanish aggression. Remember, we're talking about the fact that the Spain is coming in right now. They're instituting Article 115, and Planet Boston tells you the Madrid is literally willing to go to war if this happens. What they do is they say that they like withdraw troops. That's simply not true. Also, police forces are still there. And then it's also about the Spanish nationals and the radicals on the border. They get to go and start more conscious. That's right there. And also the issue about a civil war. Remember, they assume that 85% of people want compromise. That's simply not true. Remember, like compromise has not happened in the past. And the reason why the Catalan people want independence is compromise has failed. It failed in 2006. It failed in 2010. And also remember December 21st, the people voted in separatists. They want independence. That's why that's why Planet tells you that they're converging to factors for civil war. And 2 tells you that when you have amicable partition, you're going to decrease violence by 59%. Thank you.
Whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, we're ready. Or once Colin sits down, I guess. You guys can ask a question.
Yeah. Okay, first thing. You guys say it failed in 2006, it failed in 2010. What compromise was offered in 2006 that failed?
The tax autonomy compromise that was struck down in 2010.
It was passed in 2006.
And then it was struck down by the courts in 2010.
So it failed one time, not twice.
Yeah, sorry,
one time
that's
it failed
semantics.
was the only time there was ever majority support for independence because of one bill.
And you understand the reason why it failed is because Spain refused to budge at all on taxes.
And now they
we
are.
give you the Guardian evidence that says the whole point of the new compromise is to
The Guardian evidence says that 74% of people want
No,
compromise.
right.
The
Two
same
Guardian
part
evidence.
says, yes, I like
I think
it.
it's
In
two
my
Guardian.
rebuttal, it says that they've already created a commission to resolve the tax autonomy issue,
Right.
and that's why support dropped down to 21%, which was the same
Wait,
as the
wait, wait,
pre-2010
no.
level.
Wait, can I ask a question real quick?
No.
Okay, so you're telling me that the only reason why Catalans went independent is because like the rich Catalonians
No.
were mad about this.
Hold up.
There's always
Let me
been
just-
a faction-
let me just ask something,
There's
right?
been a
You're
faction in
misunderstanding.
Catalonia that wanted independence, but it always had about
Here.
20% support.
Let me
This
just-
proves
here.
that faction is not enough to
Devesh, let me just ask you a question, right? Like you are talking about like negotiations, right? Like when the Separatist Party in between October 1st and October 27th offered negotiations to the Spanish government, what was the response?
The response was the snap election.
They were
No, yeah, the response was, we'll reject your negotiations, we'll have a snap election. If the unionists win, then we will negotiate.
No,
It's just
yeah,
not
no,
true.
that's just not
Yeah,
what's
no,
happening.
that is what
The
happened.
parties won. You said it yourself.
Right.
Okay? And they have 70 seats out of 135.
Right.
Of those 70 seats, 62 of them are held by the two parties that have changed their stance from independence to more autonomy.
No,
That's
they
what the-
want-
Wait,
they
right,
want
real quick,
negotiations.
Let me specifically
Let
answer
Ryan
your
respond. You
Yeah.
just responded.
Here. They want negotiations, but they're not getting them because the central government in Spain is rejecting
A
them.
commission has been created.
Here, what is the date of your Guardian's
No,
evidence, right?
Right. So what happened was these leaders created an unconstitutional referendum, and Rajoy refused to compromise until those leaders were jailed, and then he created the new snap elections, which is why when the new snap elections were put in place and confirmed, he created that commission to compromise favorably.
Who is going to be at the head of the separatist coalition in Catalonia?
That hasn't been decided yet.
Yeah, they're
Right.
still voting on the president,
Exactly.
but the 70-seat parliament is the majority, and 62 of them,
No,
like I already said.
but they said that the central government wants to negotiate only with a pro-unionist
That is
coalition.
not true.
No, that is
That's
just
exactly
no.
what they
That is
said.
exactly
That's
what
just
Rajoy
He said that.
No, that's just
Rajoy said he was hoping they would win, but his side didn't
Wait,
win.
no.
He said he would only negotiate with a unionist
Okay.
Catalonian.
Okay, one more
I
thing.
know
We're
the part
like-
you're talking about.
One more thing. Can we talk about the logical warrant for why, if Spain wants to protect its legitimacy, the most legitimate thing a democratic country can do is take up arms against?
Wait. No. The warrant is not about legitimacy. The
You
warrant,
said
no.
they want to
The
defend
warrant
their legitimacy,
here.
so they won't
The
take up
warrant
arms.
is that they think that if they use the logic in your case that if Catalonia secedes, they think Basque will secede. So they're willing to go to war
So
to stop Catalonia. Yes.
And delegitimize themselves as a
Because they
country.
know there will be
In
more
response to our
conflict in the
case,
Basque if they
Spain is what
don't.
sets up
Yeah.
secession in the first place.
We're out of time.
We have 30
10 seconds.
Okay, whatever. Yeah. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm gonna start with context. The reason the round is game over for them is because they really mishandled the compromise argument in the second summary. Don't let them deal with it in the final focus, right? They say that, well, these people are not compromising. They failed in 2006 and 2010. Look at the history. There was one instance of a failed compromise, and that is the one issue that is being resolved. The Guardian says that we are already back down to pre-2010 levels of support, with only 21% of people wanting independence, a full 74% supporting supporting compromise. The Commission on Tax Autonomy is already in action. 2 of the 3 largest independence parties, comprising 62 of the seats, want compromise, don't even want independence, and the ING evidence, which is also dropped, says that there was an 85% probability through global risk analysis that the conflict de-escalates through compromise. All of this is dropped. That means it flows through. This means that there is 0 risk of conflict. A 59% decrease is not as good as a 100% decrease for a political compromise. But the second thing that is really mishandled is the warrant for why war doesn't happen. The foreign policy card says that while Spain is okay using police forces, they have traditionally balked at the use of the military because this would delegitimize them and bring them back to the Franco era. This makes logical sense. A country with a 10-point higher democracy index than the US is not willing to start a civil war. They are certainly going to be internationally cut off if they do. And we say that even the police forces that are here have all been withdrawn as of January 3rd. The last ferry left Catalonia. The police are leaving. The conflict is not going to happen. They're painting a doom-gloom scenario. Then, let's talk about the refugees argument, which they better link to lives because they establish a link to lives, which is you can vote here under their wing. They are dropping a lot of analysis here. They dropped the daily card saying that in 2016, they took 16,000 refugees. The right wing only cut it down because of resources in 2017. It's set to resume. If you can extend that, then that means that our turn flows through clean. It proves that A, you lose the only supporters of independence. B, through the economic rupture, that you're going to have less support for the EURF. But C, and most importantly, is that even if other secessionist movements don't pick up, the perception of an independence movement is still going to lead to rightward changes in other EU countries, which is going to lead to a defunding of the EURF, which then triggers the loss of life through refugee programs everywhere. Finally, on the EU argument, they just extend through in. Remember the card which says that all the other EU countries are against it because of perception, not reality. That triggers the 2/3 of exports loss, doubling of unemployment, and a recession, which precludes the ability, A, to help refugees, but B, is more likely to create the political turmoil that could set off a civil war. Thus, vote next.
Not done yet. I was like, what? An outlet? There's an outlet up there. Oh. My judge ready? Buttons. Colin. Time starts now. Starting the overview on their case, the big issue is that we give you the analysis from Cunningham that if you don't give them independence, they're going to seize it by force. We don't need to win any sort of majority arguments here. We just need to win that radicals would be willing to go to conflict right there. That's the link that's given to us that they drop in final focus. Right there, you're giving us a link into conflict. That's going to outweigh for 2 reasons. First, this is going to outweigh the refugees argument because even if more refugees are taken in, if a conflict is occurring, that's going to be the prerequisite to taking in refugees. They say themselves. But then the second and more important thing is then let's go to the actual issue about refugees, right? So they say that there's going to be a turn. They give you 3 warrants. The issue is that we can read you the Anderson evidence that postdates theirs that tells you that in the current political climate, the right wing already stops refugees. Maybe in 2016 they took in refugees. Their turn doesn't stand because in the current political climate, they're not getting access to the turn. But then they say that the economy thing's going to go down, and then they talk about balkanization and a rightward shift. First, they don't show that this rightward shift actually triggers a decrease in funding in refugees. Other countries that have very liberal parliaments, they don't trigger the brink of impact. Right there, you're not giving them the access to the turn. But then, let's go on to this last link of conflict that I don't respond to, which is on the third contention about international fracturing. Extend the planned turn that goes unrestricted responded to that tells you that other groups are turning their backs on the central government and engaging in violence because of the Catalan crisis, not because of actual independence, but because of the crisis. That's two links into conflict that don't derive from our second contention. Right there, you're giving us the link into conflict. But then on the issue of EU, there's two issues here. First, they never respond to Hedgeco, who says it's going to be an amicable agreement, in which case they're going to retain EU rights. Right there, you're not giving them the link to their exports. But then at the end of the day, we can just weigh outside independently of our second contention. You're going to look at the two conflict links I'm giving you. First, you're outweighing any argument they read for because the only offense they go for is this refugee concern and the exports at the end. We outweigh both because we're the prerequisite to good economy, because when you have conflict, that means that the economy is going to tank. That right there, that's the prerequisite. But secondly, we're the prerequisite to refugees, because a country that is focusing on radical nationalist provoking violence is never going to be able to focus on taking in refugees. Right there, that means you're giving us the prerequisite to their argument as well. At that point, we're outweighing both of the independent pieces of offense they go for, even if we're not going for a second contention. Right there, you're voting for us.